About 2 years ago, I started flying for a little startup 135 operation here in the Tahoe area, which I really enjoyed. And I love flying the planes they had, but I wanted to incorporate a plane that I thought would work better. And what really makes me grin about all this is that it's my baby. I own it, and that's really nice. I'm a one-man show. I do all the accounting, all the marketing. I'm chief bottle washer as well. So it's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun, and there's a lot of flexibility that comes in it when you're your own boss.
You just heard charter pilot Rob Lowe talking, and in a moment, he'll tell us what it's like to start your own charter business and get paid to fly a nice turboprop around the western United States. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, a weekly show with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Truscott. And of course, longtime listeners know if you're ever thinking about buying a Cirrus SR20, SR22, or even an SF50 Vision jet, or maybe you'd like flight training in any one of those, I am more than happy to help you, and if I can't help you, I'll point you in the right direction. I talk with multiple listeners every week who call in for advice, and we talk about some of the trade-offs of buying new versus used aircraft, as well as other tips to help them along in the purchase process. So if you were thinking you might be in that situation someday, give me a call today, 650-967-2500 for a free consultation and possibly a free demo flight. Now, last week in episode 125, we talked about deadly propeller accidents. So if you missed that episode, you may want to check it out. And if you found value in any of our shows, well, please go ahead and support us. You can make just a small donation through our Patreon page at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. Or if you have a PayPal account, you can make a one-time or a monthly contribution through PayPal at aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And when you do, I will read your name on the next show. Now let's talk about Part 135 charter flight operations. I first met Rob Lowe over 20 years ago when we were both active as pilots in the Los Médicos Voladores, or Flying Doctors Group. And in that group, we both flew volunteer doctors and dentists to Mexico on 4-day trips to areas where they could give care to people in underserved areas. Now, about a week ago, Rob invited me to fly with him on one of his charter trips to Roseburg, Oregon, and then back to Oakland. And a few days later, I interviewed him via Skype. Now here's that conversation with Rob Lowe. Now let me tell you a little bit about Rob Lowe. Rob is the CEO and the pilot for Air Tahoe, which is a Part 135 charter company. He has a BS in general engineering, and he formerly worked for Hewlett-Packard. He lives in the Lake Tahoe area and holds an ATP certificate and has around 6,000 hours of flying time. He's also a CFI and holds an airframe and power plant mechanics license. Rob, welcome to the show. I am excited to have you here.
Well, thank you, Max. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we got to go flying together on Monday, which was fine, so I got to learn a little bit about your charter operation. You are a one-man charter operation. When you sit back and think about this, tell me what you love about flying charter and running your own business.
Well, I've always loved flying, and one of the things I found is that some of the planes I enjoy flying are a little out of my financial reach. So I started doing some commercial flying for different people, usually just SIC work and sitting in the right seat. And that was great. And about 2 years ago, I started flying for a little startup 135 operation here in the Tahoe area, which I really enjoyed. And I love flying the planes they had, but I wanted to incorporate a plane that I thought would work better. And what really makes me grin about all this is that it's my baby. I own it. And that's really nice. I'm a one-man show. I do all the accounting, all the marketing. I'm chief bottle washer as well. So it's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun. And there's a lot of flexibility that comes in it when you're your own boss.
Yeah, that's got to be really satisfying. So tell us what a typical day looks like you, if there is such a thing.
There's really not overall, although I guess I do have certain flights that I tend to do. And because I'm up in Lake Tahoe, which is a resort area, a lot of my flying is from the Bay Area up to Truckee. So a typical day for me might be on a Friday afternoon. I'm flying down. The plane is based in Minden because I'm a Nevada corporation. I'm trying to keep everything in Nevada. So I'll fly from Minden down to Palo Alto or San Carlos or Novato. Those are the three key airports I seem to go to. And I'll pick up anywhere from 2 to 5 people and bring them up to Truckee. It's just a 45-minute flight. And from Truckee, I'll just either go back to the Bay Area and make another run if it's a busy weekend, or I'll just head back to Minden. So it's about 3-4 hours of my time to do a trip like that. And then I'll reverse it on a Sunday evening. I'll fly from Minden to Truckee, pick them up, bring them down to the Bay Area, and then fly back to Minden. That's probably about 50% of my business is doing those runs, Bay Area up to Tahoe.
I see. And you said initially you were flying with another aircraft that you thought was maybe less appropriate for this kind of work. Tell us what that was, what you're flying now, and why one's more appropriate than the other.
So this company started off with the Cirrus SR20s, which is a phenomenal airplane, and I just loved it. And it's a great airplane for Part 91 type operations. I think for 135 operations, at least here on the West Coast, it has some drawbacks. And one of those is when you're flying 135, the pilot above 10,000 feet has to be on oxygen after 30 minutes. So unlike the 12.5 rule with Part 91, it's a little stricter standard with Part 135. So if you're using a Cirrus and you have down the valley, say down to Los Angeles or something like that, you're going to be on oxygen the whole time unless you want to stay below 10,000 feet. And that can get pretty bumpy in the summertime. I think the other thing when you're doing 135 type operations are, having people have to step on the wing, climb behind the seat, and put on some headsets is probably not most people's idea of a charter business. So I'm now using a Piper Meridian, which is about the smallest turboprop out there and about the smallest one I would consider using for 135 operations. But it's nice because it has an air stair, it has club seating, and it's pressurized, and nobody has to wear headsets. It's fairly quiet in the airplane. So I think it's just works a little bit better for a 135 operation than a piston-powered single-engine aircraft.
So for people who might not be familiar with the Meridian, tell us a little bit more about that airplane.
Well, the Meridian is a great airplane. It found its roots with the Piper Malibu, which was a piston aircraft that was pressurized, and Piper wanted to get into the turbine market. Actually, they were forced to because there was a company who was taking the Malibus and they were converting them to with turbine engines, so kind of forced Piper into the game. But it's a great airplane. It's 6 seats. It's 260 knots. Cruising speed up in the flight levels at about flight level 250, 25,000 feet. And it runs on 40 gallons an hour, which for a single engine turbine is pretty economical. When you get into a TBM or a Pilatus, for instance, you're up around 60 gallons an hour. So we're 2/3 the fuel, and obviously our operating costs are a little less. It works great for my operation for short runs with 2 to 5 people, and for longer runs, it does become weight limited, but I kind of treat it as an air taxi. I love having just 2 or 3 passengers on board. It works phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. And so since it's burning less fuel, I'm guessing it must have a smaller engine. What engine does it have and how much horsepower?
It's got the PT6. I think it's 800 horsepower, but it's derated down to 500. So it's now they're calling the one I fly the M500. They also just came out with the M600 where they upped the horsepower a little bit and upped the useful load as well.
And what model year and what avionics in your plane?
So the model year of mine is a 2011. We've got just about 900 hours on it right now, and it has the Garmin G1000 in it with the GFC 700 autopilot, which I just love. And that was nice for me because I was flying the Cirrus with the Garmin 1000 in it. So it was just a very easy transition from the Cirrus to the Piper Meridian.
Yeah, and I know the M500's got the upgraded G1000 NXI, and then the M600, which is 600 shaft horsepower, has got the Garmin G3000. What's the rough price tag if somebody were either buying these aircraft used or new?
Well, I think for the M600 now is coming in right around $3 million. The M500 new is about $2.1 million. If you're looking at a used one, if you want a nice used M500, probably 1.2 to 1.5 million. And I think I've seen some of the M600s, they're not old. They've only been out for a couple, 3 years. So they're probably still over $2 million for a used one.
Now, most of us are flying around under Part 91. You're obviously flying under Part 135. Tell us a little bit about the differences, and also tell us what it takes to get a Part 135 certificate.
Well, the difference is it's just a higher standard. You can, just like when you're Part 91, you have a private pilot's license and you go commercial, and that's a little higher standard than ATP is that much of a higher standard when you're doing your testing. So that's the same. The thing I would say is with Part 135, the FAA wants to ensure that you're a capable pilot because you're carrying people for hire. Some of the differences are in Part 91, you have a flight review every 2 years. In Part 135, I have every 6 months I go up with the FAA and do a check ride. So, and as far as the aircraft is concerned, on Part 91, you have an annual inspection once a year. On Part 135 operations, we have 100-hour inspections. So, for instance, the plane I fly, we're flying at about 300 hours a year. So 3 times a year, it's in for an inspection. And that inspection is also approved by the FAA. So you have to submit a maintenance program that gets approved by the FAA. So it's not just bringing it to any mechanic that you like and saying, here, do 100 hours. It's all approved. Everything's laid out. And so again, it's just a higher standard, I think, that you have with 135. And you need that to increase the safety.
And if I wanted to start my own Part 135 business, how do I get a certificate? What does that entail?
Well, the easiest way is to go out and buy one if you don't mind spending the money, and you can find one for sale. I did mine. It took 9 months for me to get my certificate, and it's a long, tedious, involved process. My thought always was this should be able to be done in much less time, but the FAA is being, guys at local FSDOs are being pulled in a million different directions, and nothing happens quickly with the FAA. And there's also other agencies that get pulled in order to do this. You have to get what's called economic authority, and that comes from the Department of Transportation, of which FAA falls under, but it's a different division. And I waited 3 months just to get that approval, calling people on the phone that would never answer. So it's a long, tedious process. I have to tell you that, and I don't blame the FAA for it. I think it's just working with our whole government structure. It takes some time. So you better have patience if you want to go out and get your own 135 certificate.
What are some of the kinds of things that you had to write up and submit, different kinds of documents and things that you had to create? There
are a bunch of different levels of 135. Maybe I'll start with that. And my certificate, my air carrier certificate, is the lowest level. It's single pilot. So it's limited to one pilot, which is me, and I can have 3 different airplanes, but obviously only operating one at a time. To do that, to get that certificate, you have to put together a resume of your whole background. You obviously have to have a commercial pilot's license, and you basically go through every 135 reg and address it of how and you're writing a manual basically of how your company will address that regulation. Does it apply? Does it not apply? If it does apply, what are you doing? What's your plan of action to cover that reg to make sure you comply with it? And that takes, my document was 90 pages long. So it's quite tedious, but going through it really helps you learn the whole process and also really become aware of all the regulations that you have to follow under Part 135. Going on to the next level of 135, there's single pilot in command, which allows 1 pilot in command and up to 5 second in commands. And those are putting together, it's kind of like if I had a jet that required 2 pilots, I would have to have the single pilot in command because I would need an SIC if the type rating called for it. So that's the next level. The third is a basic 135 operator, somewhat similar to the single pilot, but you can have up to 5 pilots and you have up to 5 airplanes. other than that, what you do is now you have to have operating manuals they're put in place. Now, what I put together, that 90-page document, can easily be converted into those manuals, but I have not done that yet. Mine is just a little easier, and as long as I'm a one-man company, I'm just happy to have single pilot. The next two levels are a full 135 operator and no limitation on aircraft or pilots, and I think it's 9 seats or less. And then there's a 10 or more operator where you can have 29 seats or less. So those are the 5 levels of the 135.
And I'm curious, do you have to submit to some type of drug test program since you're in a safety-related position?
You do. So I'm on drug testing, and it's a random. You're in this pool with a bunch of other people, and they can call you whenever you want, and you have to go down. You have X amount of time. It's a pretty short period of time to go and get tested for drugs or alcohol.
And you just do that someplace close to where you live?
Yeah. When you sign up for it, you tell them the lab that you're going to use. I happen to have one right in the town. LabCorp is right in the town that I live in, so that's where I would go for that. And I've been called in 2.5 years once. So.
And I know you've got all kinds of other rules when you fly Part 135. I read something about runway length requirements. Tell us about that.
So there are runway length requirements. I'm flying single engine, so if you're flying twin engine aircraft, of course you have the accelerate stop distance that you have to abide by. For single engine, that doesn't really apply. So I'm looking at the manual in the airplane to see what it'll do. Is there something you looked up at that I may be missing here?
No. In fact, I just saw the reference to it and I thought, I wonder what that's about. So I didn't know if there was anything above and beyond using the standard accelerate stop distances for twins, and had no idea what they might do for singles.
There are some things that are different. There's one thing that I found interesting, but there's no land and hold short operations allowed for 135. So if you go, you don't find that often anyway, but I know from when we flew with Flying Doctors, if you landed in Yuma, Arizona, a lot of times it would be a lasso type operation there because of what they were doing with the military down there. So in 135, I'm not allowed to land on that runway. I cannot accept a land and hold short.
Got it. So I know that as a CFI, occasionally I get folks who call me up and say, "Hey, Max, you're pilot CFI. Can you pick me up here and carry me there?" And of course, I always tell them, no, that's not legal. Tell us a little bit about the differences between what I'll call fly-by-night charter and fully established Part 135. What's the FAA trying to accomplish, and what are people doing, perhaps unknowingly, sometime that goes against the rules?
Well, okay, we'll start with the flight instructors. I see that happening up here, so people will do charters, kind of like a charter, and say, well, we'll just treat it as a flight lesson. I'm going to fly you from Truckee down to the Bay Area, and we'll call that a flight lesson. And then I'm going to hang out there for you, and then I'm going to fly you back, and that'll be your second flight lesson. That's a real gray area, but I think we all know it's really not legal what they're doing. I think the worst one, though, what we're seeing a lot of now, the FAA is trying to crack down on it. They have a hotline for it, but in my industry, we call it the Part 134 and a half, and it's people who are dry leasing aircraft, which you are allowed to do, but they're basically running a charter operation. And so when you dry lease, there's supposed to be, the person you dry lease to is supposedly supposed to write 3 checks: one to the owner of the aircraft, one to the pilot of whom he or she should choose, and the third to pay for gas, parking, everything else. We have people out there right now in our area who are doing this, and they're not following any of that. The guys, they put up a shell corporation, and the client writes 1 check to that shell corporation, and they're supposedly the integrator that's handing out the money to all the different parties. But it's totally illegal, and I think the real problem is it's a real disservice to the client, because the client doesn't realize what they're getting into from a safety standpoint. Now, the fact may be that the pilot is a very capable $10,000-$20,000 pilot who's a great pilot, but you don't know that because the fact could also be that he's just got his commercial ticket. Okay. The second thing is you don't know how that airplane is being maintained. It's not being maintained under Part 135, every 100 hours type of a scheduled maintenance. It's going in for annual once a year, and you don't know who's doing it. So, and the third thing is the guy's not on drug testing. He's doing a flight review every 2 years, and that could be with his buddy going up and doing barrel rolls. So it's just a much lower standard and I don't think the general public, the average person, realizes that, and that's the downfall of it. And at some point there'll be accidents or whatever, and people will be hurt or killed, and it'll all come to light. But it's sad. I always tell people, if you're chartering an aircraft with someone, ask them for their air carrier certificate. And also, when you step in that airplane, that certificate and that air carrier number should be plainly visible before you board the aircraft. That's the regulations. If you don't see it, or if he can't produce an air carrier certificate, he's not a 135 operator. And you may be stepping into a situation that you don't want to step into.
I read one other telltale sign if you're dealing with an illegal charter. If the pilot tells you kind of what it is you're supposed to say and coaches you what to say when an FAA inspector walks up, that's probably not a charter operation.
That's probably not, yes. And that's, that should raise all kinds of red flags if you've got some guy coaching you on what to say if the FAA comes up. So I think the other thing that people don't realize when they do these 134.5, these illegal charters, is when you sign that lease agreement, that Part 91 lease agreement, you're taking operational control of that aircraft. You're responsible to make sure the maintenance has been done, the insurance is in place. All that lies on you because you're leasing that aircraft. And of course, we live in a society now where we're just bombarded with these long documents. Get a new operating system on your iPhone, there's a 10-page document, and nobody reads that. They just hit accept. And I think that's the same with these contracts that people are signing. Nobody reads the fine print.
So now you're in business, you've got your Part 135 certificate. Tell us how you find rides. I mean, are there different websites or brokerages, or how does one feed business to a company like yours?
It's a very interesting industry. I have a website. It could use some work, obviously, but I'm trying my best. And but where I get most of my business actually is through a marketplace. So I use a marketplace called Avinode. And what it is that you have all the charter operators. I'm considered an operator. And then you have charter brokers. And brokers are kind of like, stockbrokers or real estate agents or anything else. They're not, they don't own or operate aircraft in this industry. They're just out there. They have these great websites, and if you look at their website, you swear they own the airplane and they were an operator. But if you read up down on the bottom, there'll be a little disclaimer that says, "We do not own or operate aircraft." What brokers are, they're great marketers. So the bulk of my business comes through this program called Avinode, where they put out trips. I have a need for a trip. I have X amount of people. We're going from Truckee, California down to Van Nuys, and it's 2 passengers, and I want to leave on November 7th at 5 p.m. And so I will bid on that trip and say, hey, I can do that trip. This is the price, and this is the airplane I have, and we go for, and these are the en route times, everything else. And then if they like, then you come to terms and you are paid by the broker. The broker then takes this charter flight and he goes to his customer and he tacks on another 5-10%. I'm not sure what they charge. I'm sure it varies, but they take a little cut for doing what they do. And they do more than just finding the airplane. They're kind of a concierge service, so they will set cars up for the clients and hotel rooms and everything else. They're kind of like a mini travel agent, and for their services they charge a fee. So that's where the bulk of my business comes from. I'm slowly getting a little traction with my website and advertising and word of mouth, but it takes time for your website to get recognized by Google and to come up on the front page hits.
And obviously, it's a pretty small industry. You probably know all the other charter operators in your area. I'm guessing sometimes you're competing, but sometimes you're also actually also helping each other out and trading trips and things like that.
That's exactly right. I think we were probably always competing, but we get along well, and the reason for that is that you need these other operators, especially when you're a small operator like me, a one-man show. So if I have a trip booked and if I get the flu and I can't fly, I don't have a backup pilot as a single pilot operator. So, and instantly I start calling some of my competitors to see, hey, can you pick up this trip for me? And they do the same with me. So while we compete, we all get along and we work together as well. So it's really nice. It's a tight little community.
One thing I've observed is that people in the aviation industry in general are just nice people. They're
Yes, they are.
they're
Yeah.
easy to get along with, and they're doing something that they love, and you don't run into too many folks that are just cutthroat, I would guess would be the way I describe it.
No, you don't. I mean, we're all doing this partly because we love flying. It's just now recently that there's become such a demand for pilots that maybe you're getting a few people in there who are doing it for the money. But in my case, this is kind of my semi-retirement job, and it's the best job I've ever had. The view from my office is incredible.
Yeah, it is nice to be up there in the front of the airplane all the time. Well, let's talk a little bit about the economics of the charter business because, for example, I know you don't own the airplane you fly, and yet it's kind of makes it more economically feasible for everybody involved here, the aircraft owner, yourself, the customers. Tell us about how all the kind of the money flows work and why, this particular arrangement is common.
I think what I'm doing is very common in the industry. So the Piper Meridian, when I started flying it, was worth about $1.5 million. 2 million new. It was 5-6 years old, had about 400-500 hours on it, and so for me to go out and spend $1.5 million on an airplane, I could never justify that cost. If I had to take out a loan for that kind of money, I could never make the payments on what I'm bringing in. So it's just not feasible for me to run out and buy an airplane. Or if I had the money, even the opportunity cost of that money would be better served somewhere else. But what I find is, and what we're seeing in the industry is, there are people out there who want to own an aircraft, and they have enough income coming in that they need to offset some costs. So they're basically depreciating these things. There's an accelerated depreciation schedule. I think it's 5 years or 7 years. And it's a great write-off for those guys. And they tend to keep them for 5 or 7 years and then buy into a new one, and they just keep rolling it over. If the IRS ever changes the tax laws, I think the industry may be in trouble. So the airplane that I fly right now is owned by a private individual, and I fly them as well. And what I'm basically offering them by putting it on the 135 certificate is I'm offsetting some of their costs, because they were only flying it about 50 hours a year. And that's a really expensive tool to be flown only 50 hours a year. You really want to fly these things 300 to 400 hours a year. That's what makes the most economic sense. In these turbine aircraft, there's a lot of things that time out on the calendar before they do on your engine hours. So, for instance, we had to replace a fuel control unit last year. The plane only had 500 or 600 hours on it, but it had hit its 6-year time frame, so it had to be replaced. That's a $20,000 item. So if you have an airplane that you're not flying that often, you're going to find yourself the same. This year we're doing the prop because it's come up again 6 years on the propeller. So you're going to find yourself, you're overhauling things, and you don't have a lot of actual engine hours on them, just a lot of calendar time on them. If you own a very expensive aircraft like that, the best thing you can do is fly it.
Now, you mentioned that if you were sick, you're not going to be flying. Same thing goes for maintenance, I guess. How long does an annual take, and how long might you be out of the air when large maintenance jobs are being done?
So we're on a scheduled maintenance, and for the Meridian, it has 2 phases, level 1 and level 2. So what we're allowed to do is, instead of a full annual, we do level 1 the first 100 hours, then we go to level 2. Level 1 and level 2 cover a full annual. So, and there's overlap on those levels, so you're still covering everything, main items in the airplane at each 100 hour. But I can typically do that in about 3 days. 3 days time. I allot 5 days just to make sure. But it's really tough because this 100 hours, you can go over. You have to have it by 100 hours. If you go over, you can go over by about 10 hours. But then the next time, you have to subtract those 10 hours. So now you only get 90. So it's a real timing game to try and hit that and make sure the shop, the maintenance facility can accommodate you as well. So yeah, it's a tough game. And if you bring the airplane in early, say, oh, I got to in my schedule right now, and I only have 95 hours on the airplane, but I'm going to bring it in because next week I have a bunch of flights. It's going to be far more than the 5 hours I have left. You don't get credit for that. So it's not like, oh, I brought it in at 95, so now I don't have to bring it in until 105 hours later. So it's kind of a scheduling thing that you have to work out to try and optimize. And that is where if you have a bigger operation and you have more airplanes, it becomes much easier where you can, okay, it's time for this one to go in. We have this other plane to cover. But for me, I don't have that luxury at this point. So I'd like to bring on another airplane or two, but it's not that easy to find them either.
So from a scheduling standpoint, how far are people typically scheduling you? Are they calling just a day or two ahead of time or a month ahead of time? Or what does that look like?
This is a topic that baffles me to no end. I'm not alone in this. Right now, I only have a couple of flights on my books, 1 or 2 in November and 1 in December. Most of my business comes within a week or less time frame from when it's booked to when it's flying. And that's fine. I'm happy to do that, but I just don't understand. I know these people have to have these trips planned further out than a week in advance, and yet for whatever reason, that's when they get booked for me. And I've talked to my competitors, and they have the same thing going on in their business. The majority of their business is booked a week or less out.
Boy, I wonder if you had airline type pricing where if you waited to the last minute, you paid twice as much. That would change the business.
Now, there are operators out there. The thing I've seen is sometimes people will tack on a fee if it's less than 24 hours. If it's a quick, less than 24 hours or 2 or 3 hours notice, they'll tack on a little extra money. I tend not to do that. Some people do. The pricing is whatever you want it to be. That's what's nice, and it doesn't have to be the same for every trip if you choose not to. So, although I try and be very consistent with my trips, my typical Truckee Bay Area trip, I always price it the same if I can.
Any interesting stories that have come up or unusual things where you just kind of go, whoa, that was an odd customer or odd circumstance? Or what can you tell us that happens in the charter business that we might find amusing?
Well, there aren't that many things. When I first started, and I would like to get more of this business, but I was about 2 weeks into it, and I got a call from someone, and it was for an organ transplant. So I had to deliver a liver. So I kind of liked the rhyme of that, and it was interesting because it was in the middle of the night. Organ transplant, they have a sequence that they go in of when they remove these organs. The heart is first, and then this, and I think the liver is third, and the lungs are last. They can last the longest, but you're made aware of this from the get-go, and you have to be on call and ready to go. And guy shows up with a carrier service in a car and hands you this box. It's all hermetically sealed, and you fly it down and you help save someone's life, which is kind of gratifying. So that was a fun flight that I did, and I haven't done one since, and I'd like to do more of those because they pay quite well. And other than that, I'm doing a fair amount of obviously tourist type stuff coming up to Tahoe area, but then I'm doing business too. Like the flight we did on Monday, that was a good example of how an aircraft can be used to really help a guy. This was a gentleman who needed to go to a small town in Oregon, and he was going from Oakland Airport, and there's no way to get there quickly commercially, and certainly no way to get up there and back in one day. So if time is money for you, then the small charter business can really make sense. I mean, we flew him up there in about an hour and a half, and then we flew him back in about an hour and 15 minutes because we had a nice tailwind, and he was thrilled. And he was up there just for 2 or 3 hours to do his meetings, and he made just one business day out of it instead of an overnight. So it worked quite well. I've had a lot of requests for Burning Man because that's right in my neck of the woods. Unfortunately, I flew some burners to Reno, but I won't take the plane out to the playa because I just won't put that dust in a beautiful turbine engine. So,
Yes, I know some of the local flying clubs will charge a $250 cleaning fee if their members take airplanes to Burning Man because of all the alkali dust that sticks to the airplane.
yeah, we have some personal planes, and I admit I've flown out there a bunch to Burning Man, but to $1.5 million airplane, I just can't bring myself to do it. It's not fair to the owner to do that, so I just wouldn't do it to that airplane. So, and for those of you who are flying to Burning Man, I would recommend don't wash your plane right away. Get an air compressor and blow off as much of that dust as you can, because once it comes into contact with the water, that's where it gets really corrosive. So.
Now, you had talked with me a little bit about a request for a kind of a middle of the night kind of flight. Tell us, how often do those things occur, and when do you decide to accept them and versus not accept them?
So maybe it's because I just turned 60, Max, but I don't accept them that often. Last week, I had a last minute call, and it's interesting. The brokers, when it's that short notice, they get it on the phone with you. They don't just go through the marketplace, because that's online. And if you're not looking, you may not know it's out there. They start calling people. And it was a flight of, we want you to fly down to Las Vegas and pick a gentleman up at, I think it was 11 o'clock at night, and fly him up to Oakland. And then we want you to sit there for an hour, and then he's going to come back. I think it was like at 2 a.m. or something like that. So, you're going to be back in Vegas at 3:15, 3:30, and I'd probably spend the night. I wouldn't fly back up to Minden from there. But for me, I'm not at my best at those times. So that's a flight that, and you could charge a premium for that because it's so last minute. I'm sure I could have tacked on an extra $1,000 on that, and they probably would have paid it. But it's just not worth it for me to do, just from a safety standpoint. I'm not at my best at 2 or 3 in the morning flying an airplane. So again, and that's the beauty of having your own charter service. If you're working for someone else and you're on call, you might have to take that flight. I won't. We have, within the 135, we have duty times that we have to abide by. And so you have for me, for the single pilot, it's a 14-hour duty day, and then I have to have 10 hours of rest every day. And I'm allowed to fly 8 hours in that 14-hour period, just 8 hours in the cockpit. So the way my schedule goes, I could have done that flight. I didn't have anything the next morning, so I could have made that flight, but I don't want to be up at 3 a.m.
So how many flights a week do you do, or how many days a week are you flying typically?
I'm flying typically about 2 to 3 days a week, probably 3 on average. I'm trying to hit with the airplane about 20 hours a month, which may not sound like a lot, but for that 20 hours, there's a lot of time. You're driving down to for me to do a 2-hour flight from Truckee down to the Bay Area and back is a 4 or 5 hour ordeal. By the time I drive to the airport, pre-flight the plane, pick up the passengers, come back, clean up the plane afterwards, and drive home. So that's where I'm at with that. We're trying to use this plane in charter about 250 hours a year. And it becomes less in certain months, like November, late October. It's a little less right now. Of course, we're quite busy. In August, I think I flew 45 hours that month. So, but I'm trying to average about 20 hours a month on the plane.
Okay, I see. So 4 or 5 hours total for trip. And then I'm guessing you spend a fair amount of time on top of that for every trip, just in terms of communicating with either brokers or the marketplace.
A lot of time on that. So these bids are coming in. You're kind of ranked as well of how quickly you respond, and you set up a pricing profile. And so they want your bids to be close to what that pricing profile is. So when a broker puts a trip out there on the marketplace, he gets a list of all the operators out there and what that trip should come in at. So you try and be as close to that as you can. But it takes a lot of time to answer all these things. There's a lot of paperwork involved for the FAA as well. There's a lot of record keeping, logging all your flights, logging all your duty time. All that has to be on record, and they have the right to come and inspect it. And they do. They come and look at it. We want to see all your flight logs. We want to see your duty log to make sure you're getting your 10 hours of rest every time and not exceeding 8 hours of flying. And so, yeah, it's a lot of paperwork for the 135 operation. Then all the marketing and everything else on top of that as well. So it becomes a full-time job. The flying is just one aspect of it.
And I always just imagined that in the charter business, one would spend a heck of a lot of time at other airports sitting around waiting for the client to come back. And I'm guessing there's only some fraction of trips where that's the case. How often are you hanging out for hours, and what do you end up doing during that time?
Well, luckily, we live in an age where you can get on the internet anywhere right now. I tend to do it through a hotspot on my phone, but I always bring a little laptop with me. And so it doesn't bother me at all if I have to sit in an airport for 3-4 hours. I have so much I can do paperwork wise, where I link into my home computer and get on QuickBooks and start doing that. Nowadays you can set up your office anywhere. So it's really nice. The only place I can't do it right now is we don't have Wi-Fi in the airplane, and that's probably a good thing. So.
Yes, I think you're right. We have enough things that have pilot eyes looking down and not outside. Having Wi-Fi would not help that.
Exactly. Yes. So, although I would really like it for the passengers, and I'm hoping that price comes down. I was just at NBAA yesterday down in Las Vegas, and it's still out of reach for me, like $100,000 to put it on the airplane. But I know that price is going to come down someday. My brother works for Hughes on the military side, and I really want to be a beta tester for him because he's getting these incredible download speeds, over 100 MIPS, but he won't share it with me.
Won't share his bandwidth. That's too bad. So looking forward to the future, what kinds of things do you think you might do if you chose to grow the business?
Well, the dream, it would be nice. I think I will at some point upgrade to the basic and try and get another plane or two on board and maybe another pilot. And that's a double-edged sword. What's nice about what I have is you don't have any employees. You're only responsible for yourself, and that's nice. The minute you bring on an employee, now you're responsible for someone else as well, and that can come with a series of headaches, but it also can give you more free time to do things that you want to do. So I think if I grow the business, I don't think I'd grow it past a basic where I could have up to 5 planes, up to 5 pilots. The dream of mine has always been to run float planes out of Tahoe down to the Bay Area, and I just haven't figured out an economic way to do that yet. But if I could bring a float plane on to the 135 certificate, I would love to do that.
Well, I can imagine a lot of people would love to have you take them right up to their dock. That would be the ideal way to go visit their summer house.
And they used to do it. We had a seaplane base on the lake. If you find an old sectional somewhere, an ancient one, you'll see the little anchor sign over by the west shore there by Homewood.
Well, as we start to wrap up here, do you have any recommendations or thoughts that you can pass along to people who might be thinking, hey, this sounds like fun. I might like to get into the charter business?
I think if you're going to get into the charter business, the first thing is you really better love flying. If you're going to get into it for the money, there probably are some other careers that might serve you better. Or maybe you should just go the commercial route since they're hiring like crazy. And you'll have to remember that a big part of what you're doing on a 135 operation has nothing to do with flying. You've got to do the marketing. You've got to do tons and tons of paperwork to keep the thing going, all the QuickBooks or whatever you choose to do your accounting. So it's a business like any other business. And it comes with its frustrations, but also with its joys. So yesterday I came back from Las Vegas, and as a 135, as a small guy, I try and avoid the Class B airport. But Las Vegas is one you do have to go into once in a while because people just want to be down the strip instead of going to North Las Vegas or Henderson. So I'm coming out of Las Vegas, and the first thing that happened was I sat on the ground for 30 minutes before I got off. And I watched one Southwest flight after the other go in front of me, and I was thinking, boy, I'm sitting here. I definitely, that guy was still at the gate as I've been sitting out here waiting to take off. But I can't question how their priority works. It was at 6 o'clock in the evening, and I think there was a big rush, and they had to get those guys out. So that was a bit of a frustration. And then I got up to altitude, and realized I had this 55 knot headwind. So I thought, oh, there's a little more money, because everything when you're flying 135, every 10th is money out of your pocket on the Hobbs meter. So you want to try and minimize that. So that got a little more costly. But I will tell you what, as I looked to the west, we had the most phenomenal sunset last night. And I thought, I still love my job. So just make sure if you get into it, it's going to be a lot of headaches to get started. It's a lot of work with the FAA. Make sure you work with someone at the FAA that you get along with, because you're going to spend a lot of time with them. And they're all nice people at the FAA. They really are. They've got a lot on their plates, I think. So make sure you love flying. Make sure you're willing to go through a lot of frustration to get that ticket. But if you do all that, and you can make a decent living at it. You really can.
Yeah, we are indeed lucky to be able to fly. So let me ask, any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
Well, the question comes up once in a while that what should you have hour-wise if you want to pursue something like this on your own? So you need to get a commercial ticket. And I think if you want to go work for another operator, that would be great, and maybe sit in the right seat a little bit and build some more time. But I think if you're going to start this on your own, 500 hours is a little low for starting an operation like this, because you will find yourself in a lot of situations. There's some tough weather out there sometimes, and you got to fly through it. And I don't think at 500 hours, most people had that much experience in weather to feel comfortable flying in that situation. Remember, you want your customers to feel like you're on top of your game when you're up there flying. They don't want you to see you being nervous or anything. So for me, if you're thinking of starting something on your own, I think it'd be nice if you had a couple thousand hours under your belt, because then you really have a better sense of flying and better experience that you probably need to run your own operation. And there are times for me too that I've got 5,800 hours, which isn't that much, but a lot of it's in weather. And there are times, even in an airplane, the Meridian, it's single engine, but it's turbine. It's quite reliable. It does quite well in weather and in ice, but there are times I don't fly. I just have to tell the people, sorry, this is not a day where we want to go flying. And knowing that, having enough experience under your belt to make that call is something that you really need if you're running your own operation.
Makes total sense. Well, Rob, thanks so much for sharing your expertise today and helping people understand what the charter business is all about. How do people find out more about you and Air Tahoe?
So we have a website. It's www.airtahoe.com. And that has all the information, has a little bio on me, pictures of the airplane, and some specifics about the airplane. Our phone number, if somebody wants to call, is 833-AIR-TAHOE, which is 833-247-8246. And you can send an email if you want. It's rob@airtahoe.com.
And if somebody wants to charter you and they're a pilot, can they sit up front with you like I did?
Yeah, they can. They're not allowed to operate the airplane when they're sitting up there, but if they want to charter and they're a pilot and they want to sit up front, they're more than welcome to. They can. I'm happy to share with them, because it's nice to have someone in the front seat to share with.
Well, I certainly had a blast flying with you on Monday. Thanks so much for letting me do that and for sharing all this information with everyone.
Thanks for having me on the program.
Well, I've got to tell you, I had great fun flying with Rob last week in the Piper Meridian, and I think I'm going to start looking for opportunities to fly in other turboprops. And when I do, I'll tell you more about those aircraft. My thanks to Rob for coming on the show and sharing his knowledge about the charter aircraft business. And by the way, if you have a trip coming up somewhere in the West and you'd like to charter a Piper Meridian for your trip, well, you may want to hire Rob. And you can do that through his website at Air Tahoe. That's AIRTAHOE.com. And I'll have a link to his website in our show notes. And to get to the show notes and all of the links that we put up there for you, if you're using the Apple Podcast app or our dedicated aviation news talk apps for iOS and Android, just swipe up on your phone while you're listening to the show, or go out on the web and go to aviationnewstalk.com. And that's the same place to go to send me an email with any feedback or to record a listener question you'd like answered on a future show. Just go to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact at the top of the page, or click on Listener Question at the top of the page, and you can record your question. And don't forget to tell your friends about this show, because that's how we get most of our new listeners, when people like you tell their friends about the Aviation News Talk podcast. So if you find value in it, well, they probably will too. And if they don't know what a podcast is, just send them out to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, where they can download our app just as they would any other app they download. In the App Store, just search for Aviation News Talk. And of course, yes, those apps are free. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.